G'day guys, I'm back. What do you think of the beard? Keep it or lose it? Recently I've been getting a few requests to just talk about my four-wheel drive and what I've done to it and why I've done it. So in this little video, next 10-15 minutes, come with me and we'll have a look. Okay, so I guess what I should start off with first is I don't have any sponsors. If you want to sponsor me, that'd be great, but I've paid for everything on this car, normal retail price. I don't owe anybody any favours, so whatever I say is my opinion based on what I thought was the best thing to do, and based on my experience after using it for a few years or more. That done. Let's start on the front of the car and we'll work our way around. Let's start with bar work. X-Rocks is the bar. Why did I go for this? Well, it's not the biggest bar on the market, and it's probably not the strongest either. But first of all, I like the look of it. Secondly, I'm always trying to reduce weight wherever possible, and so I didn't want the heaviest bar on the market. This one provides me with good frontal protection, and it gives me somewhere to mount my winch inside. We'll talk about the winch later. It gives me protection for my spotlights, somewhere to bolt my antennas and sound flag, and these bits on the side, on both sides, if I break them or bend them, it doesn't matter how, I can just simply unbolt them, throw it away, put a new bit on. Simple. I also like the fact that it's a bit higher than most other bars, and that gives me a good good entry angle. I think what's the name for it? What do they call that when you go in? Nice angle. And while we're talking about the front end of the car, let's talk about the winch while we're here. I've gone with a Runva 11XB. I needed something a bit bigger because this car, combat laden weight, in other words ready to go, fully fueled, water, rations, everything else, weighs about 3.8 tonne. So I need a heavy duty winch. I went with the Runva, not because it's the most expensive, but it has an extremely good reputation. It's powerful, it has a synthetic rope on it. I like the way this pulls straight in there and doesn't dangle about. It's got a remote control on it, so I don't have to plug it in. And to be honest with you, I've been running it for a good 2 years now. I think I've only used it about 5 times. 2 of those times were to help other people. The other 3 times were to pull myself out. Now, I travel alone, so if I get bogged, I have to self-recover. Otherwise, there's nobody else there to pull me out. So this winch is worth its weight in gold. Highly recommend the Runva winch. I only had one problem. The solenoid malfunctioned. It would only winch one way, in, not out, or was it the other way? Doesn't matter. I contacted Runva and they sent me a brand new solenoid for free. It took me about 30 minutes to install that. No problems. Lights. I've got 2 spotlights here obviously, and another bar light on the top. I'm not going to lie guys, these are cheap eBay lights. They're very effective, but I didn't want to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on lights because I don't do all that much night driving. I prefer to drive during the day when it's stinking hot and there's lots of flies, because I don't like sitting around swatting at flies. And in the evenings I like to sit around a campfire having a beer. So usually the only time I drive at night is if I leave early in the morning and it's still dark. So I don't see the necessity for me to spend $4,000 or $5,000 on fancy lights. These, for me, are adequate. antenna, 2 of them. We'll talk about the radios when we get inside. The GME radio, antenna. I've got 2 antennas for this. This is the 2.1 dB. This I used up and down the east coast where it's terrain like this, mountainous, hilly, forests. It seems to work better. Something to do with radio frequencies and how they work. That's another lesson. At home I've got a 6.6, I think it is, dB antenna, basically same as this, but it's a lot taller. I use that whenever I'm in the outback, when there's big open spaces, deserts. That one has a longer range in that type of terrain where there's a further line of sight than this antenna here does. This antenna is for my cell phone booster. We'll talk about that a little bit further on. Still on the front, the scoop that I've put on the bonnet here, obviously that's not standard for a 200 series. It's modelled off the scoop from the front of a 79 series. Why did I put that on? I put it on, to be honest with you, just before I did the Canning stock route trip. That's about 1800 k's of desert track driving. A lot of it is sand dunes, it's hot, and it's heavy driving for the vehicle. So I figured that the more air I can get onto the intercooler for the turbochargers, the better. And I don't know whether it made a big difference, because nothing ever broke down. So it certainly didn't do it any harm. And it looks pretty sexy. Let's move on. Bar work again. I've gone with the X-Rocks bar work on the side. Why? Well, I like the way that it's minimal. Doesn't stick out too far. Very strong, bolts directly onto the chassis, and it has saved my bodywork from trees, rocks, stumps in the ground. These are magic. Disadvantage, they don't stick out very far, which means that you can't use it as a step to get in the car, and that's about it. Tyres and wheels. Okay, I switched out the standard Toyota alloy wheels for some black steelies, as you can see. I'm always very conscious, as I said before, about watching how much weight I put in my car. I try and reduce it to the absolute minimum, and steel wheels are heavier than alloy ones. But if I bend one of them in the middle of nowhere, I can bash it straight with a sledgehammer. If I bust an alloy wheel, that's it. There's nothing I can do, can't be fixed, throw it away, move on, buy a new one. Now the ones that I've gone for here are standard Toyota rims, a neutral offset. I've gone for a 20mm positive offset. That means that the overall track width is 40mm wider. Why did I do that? Because the tyres that I've fitted are slightly bigger than standard. I've gone for 33 inch by 12.5 inch, and that extra bit of 20mm on each side and the front means that when I'm at full lock, the tyres don't rub against the body. And 20mm, in my opinion, is not going to put much more stress on the joints. If I went wider, perhaps it would, but I think 20mm is quite safe, and I'm happy with it. Tyres, in this case, about 2 years ago, I went with, decided to get the General Grabbers, mud terrain. Never had General Grabbers before. I have had American-made mud tyres before, and I know that they're good. And I'd read something about these, and let me just say that this car is not built for rock climbing. It's not built for, thrashing it in the boggiest place I can find on weekends. That's cool, a lot of fun. I used to do that when I was a young fella, but this is built for long range touring, and so I don't need 35-inch hardcore tyres. I do need something a bit stronger than all-terrains, and these are a nice mix of both. As I said, 33 by 12.5, so they're bigger than standard. Mud terrain, road noise, on-road noise, is minimal considering it's a mud tyre. Performance wise, off-road, I've found them to be outstanding. The only thing I've found is if you want them to be balloony for sand driving, you've got a little bit more air out of it than you would normally, because these sidewalls are fairly thick. In the nearly 3 years that I've been running them, I've done quite a few thousand Ks, and sorry, I'll be exact, I've done 50,000 Ks on these tyres now, in all sorts of terrain, pretty hardcore terrain, some of it, and I've only ever had one puncture, and that was on the Canning stock route. I had to drive off the track, and when you do that, the wood out there, especially if a fire's been through, it's extremely hard, and I've got a little matchstick in the sidewall, and as you know, any damage to a sidewall renders the tyre unroadworthy, so I had to throw it out and get a new one. But apart from that, and all the time that I've had them, perfect. Would I get them again? I wouldn't not get them again because there's nothing wrong with them, but I am keen to try out some other ones, so when these are worn out, I probably will go for a different brand. Moving on. Let's talk about the back of the car. Bar work, starting with bar work once again. I've gone with a bar made by Outback. Why? Good question. It's definitely not the cheapest bar on the market, but the main reason I went for it is these locking latches here. I've done a lot of hay since I bought these, and they have never once let me down. I know for a fact that on some other manufactured bars, I won't name names, but these catches get fouled up with dirt and mud and sand, etc., and you can't open them. Now, there's not much point in having all of this fancy bar work if you can't get the rear wheel carriers open, particularly if you need recovering and all your recovery gear is in the back. I am completely happy with this bar. If you have a closer look and see some of the scratches on the sides, you'll see that it has saved my body work. I've never had to take this car into a panel beater yet. The only thing I have had an issue with is this wheel carrier here. It was at night. I just said I don't drive at night, but in this one case I was. It was about 9 o'clock at night. I took a wrong track, trying to do a U-turn on a skinny track in the dark by myself, and I reversed into the bank. This tyre hit it, and as a result it bent it slightly right here. So now these two wheels, one of them's a little bit crooked. No big deal. Now also I've gone for two wheel carriers because sometimes where I go, one spare isn't enough because there's no tyre puncture repair places around. But I did look into replacing one of these arms with a jerry can holder, because I don't always need to carry two spares. But to replace just the arm, get rid of that one, put a new one on, 2,000 bucks. For $2,000, I'll stick the jerrys in the car. Apart from that, great bar work, highly recommend it. Okay, let's have a look inside. There's a bit going on in here. As you can see, I've got the ARB storage unit. No problems with that at all. The only thing I would comment is this drawer underneath the fridge is pretty much useless. I've got just you know, these foldable buckets, a cutting board, wet ones, never leave home without them. Just flat things, because there's seriously only about 3 inches of space in that drawer, so you can't fit much in it. The fridge, it's on a slider, ARB fridge, perfect. Never had any issues with that. I keep all my tools in this one here, tools, spare parts, tyre inflation gear, tyre changing gear, all that stuff to do with fixing the car if something goes wrong, that's all in there. Recovery gear I keep under here, snatch strap, tree trunk protector, and a few soft and hard shackles. Fire extinguisher, big ass knife, never leave home without one of them. And I do like this little rack across the top. It just means that I can stack stuff above whatever I've got stowed in here. And I generally keep like a wet weather gear, cold weather jackets, a spare sleeping bag, dried rations. I always take dried rations with me in case I run out of fresh or frozen food. They're good up there. You can obviously get what's over there in here. I purposely left this blank because it allows me room to stack some bigger things on the side, and it saved me some money from buying that. Now, another thing I've found when living out of the back of my car is that I tend to do all my cooking, or a lot of my cooking, off this tailgate. I used to have an Nissan Patrol. They've got barn doors. That's one of the things I didn't like. This tailgate is great for doing stuff on, and to make it even better, I recently purchased this little bad boy. Slides out here. Put that in there. Lock it into place, and now I've just doubled my workspace. Now I haven't lost the storage that I have under here because this flips up and I can store stuff underneath there as well. Highly recommend that. Money well spent. What else can we talk about at the back? The fuel tank. If we have a look underneath here, and I'll show you in a minute, I've installed a plastic long-range fuel tank. This gives me the ability to carry, together with the factory one that runs on the right hand side of the vehicle, I can carry 280 litres of diesel, which equates to about 1600 kilometres of highway driving and about 1000 kilometres of sand driving. So for me that means there's not many places I can go in Australia where I need to carry extra fuel by way of jerry cans. That's a big plus, because extra fuel in jerry cans flops around, and I've found in the past that in rough terrain they can burst their lids, and there's nothing worse than that. Let's move on. Oh, before we move on, we'll come back to the battery system in a minute, but at the back here, obviously this lights the trailer. This is power out, an Anderson plug, so I can run or charge batteries or run lights or something from this one, and this one is power in. I can plug my solar blanket into there to charge the auxiliary battery, and there's another charge in point under the bonnet, which I'll show you later. Also on the side here, my inflation points for the airbags. We'll talk about the suspension. When I first bought this, it used to be a Victoria police car. Apparently they use these for towing their horse floats. So they had Old Man Emu suspension in there already, but it would have been, I don't know how old it was, but the car was starting to get that double movement. When you hit a bump, it should go bump and then stop, not keep bouncing. And I was also getting quite a bit of baldy roll in corners, so I figured it's time to change that out. So I've gone for the Old Man Emu again, the BP51 suspension. Now when you order it, they will ask you obviously what cars are going on, but they'll also ask you, do you have a bull bar? Do you have dual batteries? What do you carry in the back? Do you have two spares or one? In other words, they want to know exactly what the weight distribution of your vehicle is before they manufacture the suspension, and then when it comes to you to be fitted, it is geared perfectly for your car. Now in saying that, their shock absorbers are fully adjustable, so if you want to tweak them a bit, you still can, but I haven't found the requirement to do that. And then I've also got 400 kilo constant pressure springs in the rear, and airbags. The airbags are only there for if I've got a lot of weight on board. I generally only have between 5 and 10 psi in the bags because I don't need them. But if I put on 280 litres of fuel, 3 jerry cans of water, fill it up with food and supplies and equipment, then the airbags, I usually pump them up to about 20 psi, and it just keeps the vehicle level and stops the bottom end from sagging. Otherwise, that's the only reason I have the airbags. Let's move on. On this side, we'll talk about the rooftop tent. First of all, the roof rack itself, that's just a straight ARB bar. It used to have the bits that come up along the side there. I had to get the old angle grinder out and chop them off so that I could fit tents up on there. Now, I used to always just have an awning and I would swag it. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I did find after a while that I kind of missed the comfort a little bit. So I tried a hard shell rooftop tent made in China, and I bought it from a warehouse in Sydney. It was cheap and it was shit. I used it about 4 times, it was useless, I sold it. Then I bought a Dash soft top, and that was actually a good tent. It did a fine job, but it was a pain in the ass to put up and take down every day, especially if it was wet. Or I camped once at Kosciuszko and it was icy, so packing up a soft top tent or a soft canvas tent when it's got ice all over it is not only difficult, but it also makes all your sleeping gear, mattress and everything wet. So I did what I should have done and spent a small fortune on this bad boy, James Baroud, and in my opinion that is the best rooftop tent on the market today. I won't go into detail with it because it takes too long for this video. If anybody is interested, let me know down below in the comments, and I'll do another separate video and I'll go through it thoroughly and give you my honest opinion on what I think of it. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about what's under here. There's a lot going on under here, believe me. We'll start with the big stuff. I bought this car about 4 years ago. About 2 years ago, I was halfway for an awesome trip to Kosciuszko and it started doing strange things. I took it into a diesel mechanic in Canberra on the way back, and they discovered that I'd taken on board a dodgy batch of fuel from a servo, and as a result the fuel system was knackered. When they pulled the engine apart to change out the fuel system, which incidentally my insurance company paid for $15,000, they then discovered that there had been dust ingress into the engine which had somehow bypassed the air filter, and the 3 of the pistons didn't have the pressure that was required, so they wanted to replace the engine as well. Insurance didn't cover that, and that was $28,000. So I now have a 2019 engine, fuel system and 2 brand new turbochargers in this car. It's only done about 20,000 Ks since all that went in. One of the first things I did was replace the Toyota air filter box, which is so useless you might as well not have one. Air was bypassing the filter along the back here because there's a big gap between the filter and the box. Air comes in underneath, straight over around the filter and into the engine. So the first thing I did was buy an aftermarket air filter box from Patrol Doctor. I'll show you a photo of that later if you want to buy one. They're not cheap. They come in this chrome colour and black, but it's much cheaper than replacing another engine. In addition to that, we'll start with the fuel system. there's a water watch system that I had installed at the same time as the new engine went in. That basically, there's an alarm inside. If that system detects the tiniest, minutest bit of water, it'll trigger an alarm inside, and I know immediately to stop, because water in these new high-tech engines is catastrophic. After that, the fuel goes through the normal fuel system. My next favourite thing that I've done is a Unichip Q4. The Q4, why did I go with that? I did have it, originally I just had it remapped. And when all the dramas happened with the engine, I had to get the ECU posted to the guy who remapped it so that he could put the factory settings back in it, so that when they put the new engine in, they would have the stamp, and then it was painful. So one of the reasons I went for a chip is because if something happens, I can just disconnect the chip, plug in the factory settings, off we go. I went with the Q4 because it does everything all in one unit. I now, to cut a long story short, am getting close to 800 Newton meters of torque. I'm getting about 40% more power. The fuel economy is much better. In fact, on a trip, on the highway, I'm getting close to 13 litres per 100 k's. Considering I've got it loaded, big tyres, a roof rack, a rooftop tent, which creates more drag, and it's heavier, that's extremely good mileage out of it. Now, the other thing that I've done in conjunction with the chip is what they call a torque converter lockup kit. I'm not a mechanic, so I'll cut through this. I'll give you the gist of it. Basically, the 6-speed automatic transmission in the 200 series Land Cruiser is not particularly well matched with the engine, which is very powerful and has a lot of torque. That results in the transmission, when you're driving around, hunting for gears all the time, and it won't drop into 5th gear till you hit about 100 k's, and it rarely ever goes into 6th gear until you get to about 120 k's. That means that driving on the freeway at 110 k's, you're still only in 5th gear, and you're doing about 2 to 2,100 RPMs. The torque converter lockup kit, what that does essentially is it puts the transmission into 5th gear as soon as I hit 80 k's, and it will hold it there. As soon as I hit somewhere between 100 and 110, it'll drop it into 6th gear and hold it there. Even going up a slight incline, it'll hold it in 6th gear. That means that now I'm only doing about 15 to 1600 RPMs at 110 k's, which means that all over, my temperatures, transmission and engine are a lot lower, and my fuel economy is better, and it is much nicer, more smoother and easier to drive because the transmission isn't dropping in and out of gears all the time. The chip and the torque converter lockup kit is probably my favourite mods on this car. Catch can. I would highly recommend that on any modern diesel. Basically, what it does, and I'll cut it short again, is it traps all the gunk that would clog up your air system. It keeps it all clean. To get the EGR on this engine cleaned out totally is a $1,000 job. One of these I think is somewhere in the vicinity of 300. My mechanic empties it out every 5,000 k's, and it keeps my engine and my air intake spotless. Okay, let's talk next exhaust. Air intake, air out. For the air intake, Safari Air Max snorkels, so that it brings plenty of nice cold air in. Air out, I've switched out the standard exhaust for a Typhoon 3-inch all the way through from the back of the turbo, so bigger dump pipes all the way back. The dump pipes that come standard are actually really small. These now go straight into 3 inches, and the power is noticeable. This of course is pre-DPF, so I believe with later models than this vehicle the exhaust isn't going to make as much difference. I've gone for the quieter note of the two types of exhaust that you can get, only because the louder one doesn't give any performance enhancements, and I don't like that droning noise that you get from a loud exhaust on the road. Alright, batteries. This model only originally came out with one battery. When I got it, because it was an ex-cop car, it came out with two, connected in series, so that you maximize the cranking power for starting. Now, I talked to my auto electrician, we both agreed that in these warm climates you probably don't need all that cranking power, so now they are separated. This battery here is solely for starting and running my winch, because I figured that the engine is always going to be running if the winch is being used, so I'm not going to drain the battery. That one there is my auxiliary battery. That runs my fridge and lights and charging points for charging camera batteries, etc. And you'll see my little red arc thing there. That allows me to plug in my solar blanket, so when I'm stationary, my auxiliary battery running my fridge and lights is not going to go flat. Let's talk about the interior. Radio. Now I've gone with a Uniden. It's not the most expensive. It's not the best radio on the market, not going to lie. I think it cost me about $260 odd. Now my theory is that a UHF radio is only good for talking to other vehicles in your packet or travelling with you. In some cases, if there is a good line of sight, so in the desert country or like where I am now, and I can see way over there, I could get up to 5, 6, maybe 10 k's with a UHF. So it's not long distance communications like HF or even VHF. So this really, to my mind, there's not much point in spending a lot of money on a flash UHF radio. I would rather spend a lot of money on the antenna. The reason I went for the Uniden also is because it's got all the controls on the hand piece here, which means that I can stow the radio itself underneath the steering column where it's nice and out of sight. Hang it up there, beautiful. The only other thing I've done is replace the head unit. The Toyota head unit is pretty much useless. I've got a Pioneer one here with Apple CarPlay. I love it. It means I can plug my phone into the glove box there, and everything is hands-free, plus I've got Google Maps. Scan gauge. I've got one of these. This allows me to keep an eye on the running temperatures of the vehicle at all times. Exactly what the running temperatures are. That's important to me. And it also means that I can keep a track of on my economy. I can have it for instant economy or what I've done over the period of a trip. And also sometimes with these 200 series you'll suddenly get lights flashing on the dash. It means that I can delete any errors before I panic and rush off to a mechanic. Apart from that, I have not changed a single thing on the inside of this vehicle. It's perfect. Alright guys, there's my rig. I hope you found that useful. If you want to know anything else, like where I bought something or how much I paid for it, feel free to let me know or ask me in the comments. I'll answer it in the comments as well. That way, if anybody else wants to know the answer to that question, everybody can see it. Thanks very much. See you next time.